November 14, 1961, exactly 9:47 p.m. The cabinet door creaked open, and the folder waited where it was never supposed to be seen. Bumpy Johnson entered the back room without looking at the door. He never did. The room already knew him. The air adjusted first, then the men did. The cabinet stood against the far wall, old wood, one hinge tired enough to sigh when moved. It was open just enough to be noticed. Inside sat a single folder. No markings, no string, nothing to make it special except where it waited. Bumpy passed it once without turning his head. He set his hat on the table, slow, precise. The room followed his hands. He sat. Silence arranged itself around him. Someone at the edge of the room shifted their weight. A small sound, a shoe correcting its place on the floor. That was the danger, not a weapon, not a threat. A man noticing something he was not meant to notice. Bumpy's eyes lifted, not to the cabinet but to the man, calm, level. The look did not ask a question. It answered one. The man froze where he stood, halfway between staying and pretending he had never seen anything at all. The folder remained where it was. Bumpy did not close the cabinet. He did not signal anyone to do it for him. He let the moment sit long enough to be understood. Harlem had taught everyone in that room the same rule. What you see depends on where you stand, and where you stand depends on who allows it. Bumpy leaned back slightly, just enough to make the chair speak. He folded his hands in his lap. The cabinet stayed open. "Some doors," he said quiet, "close themselves." No one responded. They did not need to. The man by the wall felt the words land where breath usually lived. He had not moved, but his position had changed. Everyone could feel it. The week ahead pressed in without being named. By the end of it, something would be finished, either spoken into the open or buried so deep it would never ask to be heard again. There was no rush in that knowledge, only wait. Bumpy stood. He crossed the room, slow enough to count the steps without trying. When he passed the cabinet, he did not look inside. He did not need to. The folder was doing its work without being touched. The man's eyes followed Bumpy instead. That was the mistake. Not the looking, but the choice of what to look at. Power was not in the object. It was in who decided whether the object mattered. Bumpy stopped near the door. He turned just enough for his voice to carry. "Everybody goes home the same way tonight," he said, thinking. The cabinet stayed open after he left. The folder stayed where it was. No hands reached for it. No one closed the door to make themselves feel safer. The certainty settled in before anyone spoke again. The room had already changed. And the question that remained, unanswered and unasked, pressed quietly against every thought. Once something is left to be seen, who is responsible for what happens next? The room emptied the way it always did, carefully. Chairs slid back without complaint. Coats were lifted, not shaken. Men left in pairs or alone, never in groups large enough to look planned. The cabinet remained behind them, unchanged, patient. The man who had noticed it stayed longer than the rest. Not because he wanted to, but because leaving too quickly would have admitted something. He stood where he was, hands loose at his sides, eyes forward. He did not look again. He didn't need to. The image had already fixed itself in his mind, sharper than any label. Outside, a car passed. Tires hissed on damp pavement. Harlem kept moving. The man finally turned, slow enough to look casual. He crossed the room with the care of someone stepping around a sleeping animal. The cabinet was close now, close enough to smell the wood, close enough to hear the hinge breathe. He stopped beside it, not in front, beside, as if proximity alone could be denied later. The folder did not shift. No air moved. It waited like something that had already decided its future. He told himself he would only close the cabinet. That was reasonable, respectful, a small correction. His fingers lifted, hesitated, then dropped back to his side. Closing it would mean touching it. Touching it would mean admitting it existed. He stepped away. That was when he understood the shape of the deadline. Not a ticking clock, not pressure from above. It was quieter. By the end of the week, he would either know what was inside that folder, or he would spend the rest of his life knowing that he chose not to. There would be no third option. He left the room without closing the cabinet. The night outside felt colder than it should have. He walked 3 blocks before realizing he had passed his turn. He did not correct it. He kept walking until the streets thinned and the lamps grew farther apart, thinking just as he had been told. Bumpy Johnson did not follow him. He did not need to. Authority, when placed correctly, travels on its own. By morning, the cabinet was still open. No one mentioned it. No one asked why it hadn't been closed. The silence around it thickened, took on shape. It became understood that the folder was not a mistake. It was an offer. The man returned later that day, earlier than usual. The room was empty this time. The cabinet waited in the same position, unchanged by daylight. He stood in front of it now, no longer pretending otherwise. He reached out. The hinge made its tired sound as the door opened wider. The folder sat alone, heavier than paper should be. He did not sit. He did not breathe. He lifted it and felt the weight settle into his hands, steady and final. He opened it. Nothing jumped out. No shock, no chaos, just order, names written cleanly, dates that did not argue, facts that did not raise their voice. He closed the folder and stood there longer than he meant to. When he placed it back inside the cabinet, he understood something with certainty. The room had not changed when the cabinet was left open. It had changed when someone decided to look. And the question pressed itself into place, quiet and unmovable. Now that he knew, what would silence demand in return? He did not sleep that night, not because of fear. Fear asks for movement. This was heavier, this stayed. Morning came without relief. The light through his window did not soften anything it touched. He dressed slower than usual, careful with buttons, careful with cuffs, as if precision could keep things orderly. The folder was not with him, yet it walked beside every thought. By the time he stepped onto the street, Harlem was awake. Shop doors lifted. Radios murmured. Men nodded to one another without stopping. Life behaved as if nothing had been disturbed. That was the first lesson. The world does not react when a single man's balance shifts. He told himself he would not return to the room. That would have been the sensible choice. But sense was no longer in control. Knowledge was. Knowledge does not shout. It waits. He arrived earlier than he needed to. The room was quiet again. The cabinet was closed now. That mattered more than he expected. He stood across from it, hands behind his back. The folder was no longer visible, yet its absence felt louder than its presence had been. Closed doors do not erase what was seen behind them. They only confirm that someone knows it matters. Bumpy Johnson was not there. That too was deliberate. The man sat and waited. He replayed the pages in his head, the order of the names, the dates that lined up too cleanly to argue with. There was no cruelty in what he had read, no threats, just truth laid out the way ledgers are laid out, balanced, finished. By noon, he understood the second lesson. Silence is not empty. It is filled with responsibility. A voice entered the room, not raised, not hurried. "You look like a man carrying something," Bumpy said. The man did not stand. He did not greet him. He only nodded once. Enough. Bumpy sat across from him, hands resting openly on the table. No folder between them. No cabinet in sight. "I didn't take it," the man said. "I know," Bumpy replied. The words landed cold, exact. Not forgiving, not accusing, just final. The man swallowed. Then why leave it? Bumpy leaned back slightly. The chair accepted his weight. "So you could decide," he said. The pressure settled fully then, not as panic, as clarity. Outside, the day moved forward without waiting for either of them. Inside, one certainty had already taken hold. Once a man looks twice, he never looks the same again. And the question pressed closer, unavoidable now. If no one tells you what to do with the truth, does that make you free or alone? Bumpy did not fill the silence. He never did. Silence was not a gap to him. It was a tool already doing its job. The man shifted in his chair. Not away, not closer, just enough to admit the weight had settled in his body. He kept his hands on the table where they could be seen, an old habit, visibility as protection. "You knew someone would read it," the man said. Bumpy nodded once, not agreement, recognition. "Someone always does." The room held that answer without comment. Outside, a siren passed and faded. Inside, the man understood something he had been avoiding since morning. The folder had not been bait for greed. It had been bait for conscience. And conscience, once touched, does not let go cleanly. "I didn't change anything," the man said. "I didn't copy it, I didn't speak about it." Bumpy's eyes stayed on him, steady and unblinking. "I know," he said again. That word returned heavier the second time. Knowing meant watching. Watching meant time. And time was the real deadline, not the end of the week, not a court date. Time itself, waiting to see what kind of man would remain. The man leaned forward just slightly. "If this comes out," he said, careful, "people will ask why I waited." Bumpy's mouth did not move for a moment. When it did, his voice stayed low. "They always ask the wrong question," he said. The man nodded. He had already learned that much. Truth did not protect anyone from suspicion. It only rearranged it. Bumpy stood. The meeting ended the way it began, without ceremony. He did not offer a hand. He did not give instructions. He walked to the door and paused there, long enough to be heard without turning around. "Testifying is loud," he said. "Living with it is quiet." Then he left. The man remained seated after the door closed. He did not rush to follow. He did not check the cabinet. He stared at the place on the table where the folder had never been. By evening, the decision was already finished, though he would not admit it yet. That was how these things worked. Choices announced themselves later than they are made. The week passed without incident. No messages, no reminders, no pressure from Bumpy or anyone else. That absence was intentional. Pressure applied directly breaks things. Pressure left alone shapes them. On the final day, the man stood outside the building where testimony was taken. He arrived early. He always did. Habit pretending to be discipline. He did not go inside. Instead, he turned and walked away, steady, unhurried, as if the path had always been planned that way. No one stopped him. No one called his name. The cabinet stayed closed after that. The folder was removed, not hidden, not destroyed, simply placed where it no longer needed to wait. The certainty settled fully at last. The truth had been seen, weighed, and set aside without force. And the question that followed him into the street, colder now and impossible to ignore, asked itself plainly. When silence is chosen without fear, is it still silence, or is it judgment? The meeting happened without invitation. No call, no note. The man arrived because arriving felt inevitable. That was how Bumpy Johnson arranged things, so choice looked like habit. The room was different this time. The cabinet was gone from the wall, not moved, removed. The space where it had been looked cleaner than the rest, like a scar that had healed too neatly. The man noticed immediately. He said nothing. Bumpy entered without sound. He took the chair across from him, not at the head of the table. Equal distance. That mattered. Authority did not need height. They sat for a moment without speaking. The man waited for the folder to appear. It did not. "You came," Bumpy said. "Yes." "That tells me enough." The man's hands rested flat on the table. He kept them there. He had learned that stillness could be mistaken for confidence, and sometimes that was useful. "I wasn't asked to," he said. Bumpy nodded, "No." Another pause, longer this time. the kind that asks for honesty without demanding it. "I read everything," the man said. "I know." The word did not soften, it did not harden, it stayed exact. The man drew a breath and let it out slowly. It wasn't what people think. Bumpy watched him the way men watch weather, without expectation of control. "Truth rarely is," he said. The man leaned back slightly, not retreat, adjustment. "There's nothing in there that helps me," he said, "and nothing that hurts you." Bumpy's eyes lifted just a fraction, enough to mark the sentence. "Then it's honest," he said. The man hesitated. This was the edge of it, the place where silence usually breaks. He chose his words carefully. "They'll ask why I waited," he said, "why I didn't come forward the moment I knew." Bumpy tilted his head, not disagreement, consideration. "They always want the moment," he said. "They don't like the time before it." The room held that thought. Outside a car backfired, inside nothing moved. The man nodded once. "I won't be there," he said. Bumpy did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice stayed low enough to keep the walls listening instead. "I didn't ask you to be," he said. That was the confrontation. No raised voices, no threats, no promises, just truth laid between them and left to breathe. The man stood. He straightened his coat, old habits again, order as comfort. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around. "You planned this," he said. Bumpy answered without looking up. "I allowed it." The difference mattered. The man left. His steps did not hurry. He walked like someone who had already finished running. Bumpy remained seated after the door closed. He did not reach for anything. He did not adjust his position. He let the quiet settle into its final shape. The deadline passed without announcement. No calendar marked it. No clock acknowledged it, but it passed all the same. The cabinet did not return. The folder did not either. The certainty settled in, complete and unchallenged. No force had been applied and still nothing would be said. And the question lingered in the empty room, calm and unresolved. When truth is met and dismissed without resistance, who carries its weight once it's gone? Bumpy Johnson remained where he was, hands resting where they had been the entire time. He did not check the door. He did not listen for footsteps. He trusted what had already been decided. Trust for him was not hope. It was assessment. The absence of the cabinet mattered more now than it had when it was present. Objects teach people where to look. Their removal teaches them where not to. The wall looked cleaner, yes, but also thinner, as if something essential had been taken with it. Bumpy stood and crossed the room alone. His steps were measured, the same length they had always been. He paused where the cabinet once stood and placed his palm against the wall just once, flat and brief. Not sentimental, confirming. The folder was no longer part of the room. That did not mean it was gone. It meant it had finished its work. He thought about the man who had read it, not with concern, with accuracy. Some men collapse under truth, others build around it. This one would build. He would keep his routines. He would never explain himself. He would learn how to live with a thing that never asked permission to exist. Bumpy returned to the table and sat again. He adjusted nothing. No jacket, no chair. He let the stillness make its final pass through the space. Later that evening, word would move quietly, not as news, as understanding. The man would not testify. No reason would be given. None would be demanded. Harlem did not require explanations when outcomes were clear. A younger man entered the room and stopped short. He looked at the wall, then at Bumpy. He hesitated, then spoke. "People are asking if something went wrong," he said. Bumpy did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice stayed level. "Nothing went wrong," he said. "It went the way it does." The younger man nodded, unsure why he felt relieved. He left without another word. Night settled over the neighborhood. Lights came on in windows. Radios found their stations. Somewhere, a chair scraped across a floor and laughter followed. Life continued without consulting the truth it had just passed. Bumpy stood once more. He put on his hat. He did not check his reflection. He did not look back at the wall. He walked out the same way he always did, without leaving instructions behind. By morning, the place where testimony was taken would be ready, papers aligned, seats arranged, the stand polished and waiting. It would remain unused, not because of fear, not because of threat, because a man had been given space to decide what knowing required. The consequence was simple and concrete: an absence, a voice that would not rise, a seat that would not be filled. Bumpy Johnson did not attend the courthouse. He did not need to. The judgment had already been delivered without ceremony, quietly, permanently. He adjusted a small habit instead. From that day on, he arrived earlier than before and left without saying goodbye. The kind of change only people close enough to notice ever noticed. The folder did not return. The cabinet did not either. The truth remained intact, untouched by spectacle, carried forward only by those who had seen it and chosen their silence with open eyes. And the final pressure settled into place, calm and immovable, asking what it had been asking all along. When power offers truth without force, is refusing to speak an act of cowardice, or the purest form of judgment? The courthouse opened the way it always did, early, quiet, predictable. Clerks arranged papers with practiced care. Chairs were aligned, then realigned. The witness stand was wiped down even though no one had touched it the day before. Preparation is a habit institutions keep, even when they suspect it will not be used. The man arrived on time. That mattered. He stood at the edge of the building and watched people enter, lawyers with briefcases worn soft at the handles, men who spoke too much before coffee, others who said nothing at all. No one looked at him twice. That too was familiar. He did not go inside. Across town, Bumpy Johnson sat in a quiet room and read the morning paper without reading it. The words passed his eyes without staying. He folded the paper neatly and set it aside. He already knew how the day would hold. The physical anchor returned without being seen, not as a cabinet, not as a folder, but as the knowledge that both were gone. The absence followed the man like a second coat, heavy, properly fitted. He walked away from the courthouse at an even pace, not hurried, not defiant. Anyone watching would have assumed he was late for something else. Anyone watching would have been wrong. Inside the building, time passed. The judge waited. A name was called once, then again. Each time the sound faded faster than the last. No explanation followed. None was requested. People exchanged looks, not surprise, recognition. This was not the first empty stand they had seen. It would not be the last. By midday, the seat remained untouched. The stand stayed polished. The truth sat somewhere else entirely, intact and unreachable. The man spent the afternoon walking. No destination, just movement. He passed streets he knew well and others he had avoided for years. He did not stop. Stopping would have invited thought. Thought had already done its work. When evening came, he returned home and did exactly what he had always done. He ate. He washed the plate. He sat in the same chair and listened to the radio until the voice blurred into noise. Nothing in his life collapsed. That was the cost. Truth does not always destroy. Sometimes it leaves everything standing and asks you to live inside it anyway. Bumpy Johnson did not call. He did not send word. He did not check the result. He trusted the shape of men once he had measured them. That night Harlem moved as it always did. Music from an open window. Laughter too loud for the hour. Somewhere an argument ended before it became one. The day closed without ceremony. No headlines, no record worth keeping. And the pressure question followed the man into sleep, still unanswered and heavier than before. When the stand waits and no one rises, does the truth disappear, or does it simply change where it lives? Morning returned without apology. The man woke at the same hour he always had. Habit survived where conviction could not interfere. He shaved carefully. He dressed as if the day had asked something of him, even though it no longer would. The courthouse never crossed his mind again, not directly. It lived elsewhere now, in the way he paused before answering simple questions, in the way he listened longer than necessary when others spoke. Truth has a way of teaching patience after it is refused. Across the city, Bumpy Johnson adjusted his routine by minutes, not meaning. He arrived earlier to places where nothing needed to be said. He left before conversations reached their end. People noticed, though no one mentioned it. Power, when secure, does not explain its movements. The cabinet never returned. The space it once occupied remained bare. No one suggested filling it. That absence was understood. Objects that finish their work are not replaced. Weeks passed, then months. The man kept his position. He kept his voice measured. He was never accused. He was never praised. The world accepted his silence the way it accepts weather, without needing permission. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would open a drawer and stop, hand resting on nothing in particular. The folder was not there. It never had been. But the habit remained. Absence can train the body as well as presence ever did. One night, a younger colleague asked him why certain things never made it to the stand. The question was casual, unarmed. He considered answering. He considered the cost of doing so. He closed the drawer instead. Bumpy Johnson heard eventually that the question had been asked. He heard that it had not been answered. That was enough. Judgment does not require celebration. It requires completion. The final consequence was not dramatic. No arrests reversed. No history rewritten. Only one chair that remained empty season after season. One voice that never entered the record. One truth that stayed intact because it was never forced into daylight. Bumpy changed one last habit. He stopped leaving the light on when he left a room. Darkness, he decided, deserved clarity too. The story did not end loudly. It settled like dust, like certainty. And what remained, for anyone willing to carry it, was the quiet question that refused to disappear. If truth is offered without threat and declined without fear, who does it belong to after that?